What if certain objects were never meant to be touched? Throughout history, humanity has woven stories of cursed treasures and haunted relics, tales of things that should never have been unearthed, let alone kept. They sound like folklore, warnings from a more superstitious age. But what if some of those stories aren't just stories? What if they reflect something deeper, our fear of the past, our awe of craftsmanship, and the uneasy feeling that some objects carry memories not just of people, but of pain? This is not a tale of horror, nor a dramatized myth. It is a meditation on the strange relationship between humans and the artifacts we create or inherit. Objects of beauty, history, and mystery that for reasons no one can fully explain seem to bring ruin to those who possess them. Each has been meticulously catalogued, examined, and even displayed, yet none have had their secrets fully uncovered. Take, for example, the Basano Vase. Forged from silver during the Renaissance and intended as a wedding gift, it became the silent witness to the bride's sudden, agonizing death. Her family, grieving but unwilling to part with the beautiful object, passed it along. One by one, its owners fell. Illness, accidents, and whispers of shadows followed the vase wherever it traveled. Eventually, it vanished, buried again, deep underground, wrapped in cloth, locked in a lead box. Or consider the Porsche 550 Spider, affectionately named Little Bastard by its most famous owner, actor James Dean. A week before his fatal crash, Dean was warned by Alec Guinness, yes, Obi-Wan Kenobi, that he would die in that car. And he did. But the car did not die with him. Its parts were reused in other vehicles, each of which was involved in deadly or devastating accidents. The car became a traveling exhibit, and even then, it injured students, crushed a man, and eventually disappeared. Then there's the woman from Lem, a limestone statue uncovered in Cyprus. Supposedly a fertility idol, it was quickly linked to death rather than life. Every family that brought it into their home was wiped out. One by one, the lineage of each owner vanished under mysterious and painful circumstances. Eventually, it was donated to a museum, where even professional curators refused to touch it. It now sits encased in glass, untouched by human hands. These are not ghost stories told in the dark. They are records of objects that remain locked away, misunderstood, and feared. But what do these cursed artifacts really say about us? Why do we continue to collect, study, and even cherish them? Is it our thirst for history, a desire to test fate, or something even more primal, a need to believe that some things are larger than ourselves? In the chapters that follow, we explore 12 such objects, not to sensationalize them, but to understand the line between coincidence and consequence, superstition and psychological imprint. We'll examine their origins, the tragedies they're linked to, and the people who became part of their story, whether they wanted to or not. And finally, we'll ask a question that lingers beyond logic. Can an object remember? This is the journey of haunted history, a story not of monsters or malevolence, but of objects with memories too heavy to bear. The vase, the car, the painting, the box, these are the cursed. It begins, as many tragedies do, with a gift. In the late 15th century, in a small village near Naples, a silversmith labored over a commission meant to celebrate a beginning. The object was a vase, crafted from solid silver. Its surface worked with such care that light seemed to pool and glide across it. This was no ordinary household item. It was intended as a wedding gift, a symbol of prosperity, continuity, and hope, something to be held, admired, and passed down through generations. On the night before her wedding, the young bride received the vase. We don't know her name. History rarely preserves such details. What survives instead is the moment she held it, perhaps studying her reflection in the polished metal, imagining the life ahead of her. By morning, she was dead. She was found on the stone floor of her bedroom, her body contorted in pain, the vase clutched tightly against her chest. Family members struggled to pry her fingers loose. Local accounts say that as she lay dying, she whispered a warning that the object would bring death to anyone who claimed it after her. Whether this was grief-stricken imagination or a real utterance, no one can say. What matters is what followed. The family kept the vase. Silver was valuable. Superstition was easy to dismiss. Within 3 months, the next owner, a young, healthy man, fell ill with a wasting disease no physician could explain. He died quickly. The vase passed again. This owner died in an accident not long after. Patterns began to form, the kind people notice only when fear sharpens attention. Eventually, the surviving family made a choice. They did not sell the vase, unwilling to pass misfortune to strangers. They did not destroy it either, perhaps fearing that breaking it would somehow make things worse. Instead, they wrapped it in heavy cloth and buried it in a secret place, entrusting the earth to hold what they could not. For more than 5 centuries, the vase remained hidden. Time passed. Empires rose and collapsed. Languages changed. The story faded into obscurity. Then, in 1988, a man digging in his yard uncovered a tarnished silver object. Inside it, he found a decaying piece of parchment bearing a simple warning. "This vase brings death." He threw the note away. To a modern mind, the message was quaint, a relic of medieval fear. The vase, however, was undeniably valuable. Cleaned and restored, it was sent to auction, where it sold for a staggering sum. Its new owner, a pharmacist, displayed it proudly in his home. He trusted science. He believed in rational explanations. 3 months later, he died suddenly of heart failure. The vase changed hands again. A surgeon purchased it next, amused by the rumors attached to his acquisition. He was 37 years old, fit and skeptical. 2 months later, he was dead from acute respiratory failure. Another owner followed, an archaeologist, a man deeply familiar with ancient objects and their histories. He survived barely 3 months before succumbing to a mysterious infection that shut his organs down one by one. By now, the vase's reputation had returned. A family who acquired it experienced illness and disturbing occurrences almost immediately. Terrified, they threw it from their balcony. It hit the pavement below, dented but intact. When police arrived, the family begged them to take it, to bury it, destroy it, anything but bring it back inside. The authorities took custody of the vase. Museums refused it. Collectors declined. According to reports, it was sealed in a lead-lined container and buried deep in an undisclosed cemetery, where it remains. Or so the story goes. The Basano Vase raises an uncomfortable question. At what point does coincidence become narrative? And why do humans persist in giving meaning to patterns that frighten us? Perhaps the vase is nothing more than silver and probability, or perhaps it is a mirror reflecting our unease with inheritance. The idea that not everything passed down carries blessings. Sometimes what we inherit is unfinished grief, and sometimes we feel safer when it stays buried. September 23rd, 1955. A silver Porsche gleamed under the California sun as a young actor stood beside it, practically vibrating with energy. James Dean was on the cusp of legend, 24 years old, rebellious, magnetic, and utterly in love with speed. He called the car Little Bastard. It was sleek, powerful, dangerous. To him, it was perfect. That afternoon, outside a restaurant in Los Angeles, Dean ran into Alec Guinness. The British actor later recounted the moment in chilling detail. He saw the car and felt an overwhelming dread. He told Dean, urgently, seriously, not to drive it. "If you get in that car," Guinness warned, "you will be found dead in it by this time next week." Dean laughed. A week later, the prophecy came true. On September 30th, Dean's Porsche collided with a Ford sedan at high speed. The actor died instantly, his neck snapped by the force of the impact. The car was mangled, but it didn't stop there. The wreck was purchased by George Barris, a custom car designer who saw opportunity in tragedy. He began selling parts of the Porsche to racers. The engine went to one, the transmission to another. Both men crashed during the same race. One fatally, the other permanently injured. The remaining tires were sold. Both blew out simultaneously while mounted on another vehicle, causing a near-fatal accident. The car's body was sent on a public safety tour, warning teens about speeding. But the exhibit too seemed cursed. In one garage, a fire reduced every vehicle to melted frames, except the Porsche, which remained oddly untouched by the flames. During a school display, the car rolled off its stand and crushed a student. Each time it seemed to vanish, it reappeared, and someone else was hurt. Eventually, in 1960, the car was being transported by train. When it arrived in Los Angeles, the boxcar seal was unbroken. But when they opened it, the car was gone. It had simply vanished. Some believe it was stolen. Others believe the car simply fulfilled its purpose, sated after taking enough lives. Whatever the truth, Little Bastard was no ordinary machine. And whether one views its history as cursed or coincidental, the emotional toll is undeniable. What makes an object dangerous? Is it the metal and gears? The speed it's capable of? Or is it the intention, the energy of those who own it, the way we pour ourselves into the things we love, the way tragedy imprints itself on matter? James Dean loved that car. He adored it. His excitement was palpable, infectious even. But perhaps that's what gave it power. Not some ancient curse, but attention, the way stories accumulate around certain things until they become more legend than object. The wreckage is still missing. Some say it's buried. Some say it was melted down. Some say it waits. In a world obsessed with restoring the past, with reviving what was lost, how long before someone finds a way to bring it back? And if they do, would you ride in it? Or would you feel the ghost of Dean whispering, "Not this one, not again"? Some things belong to memory, not the road. In 1878, beneath the sun-bleached ruins of Lem, Cyprus, workers uncovered a statue carved from limestone. It was small, primitive, and weathered. A woman with exaggerated, elongated features, her arms folded across her chest in an ancient pose of permanence. To the archaeologists, it was a fertility idol. To the locals, it was something else entirely. They called her the goddess of death. The warnings were quiet at first, spoken in hushed tones. The elders advised against removing her. "Let the earth keep what it cradles," they said. But the British team ignored the whispers. The statue was taken to England, destined for display in a private estate. Lord Alanth, the statue's first known modern owner, was a collector of antiquities. Within 6 years, every member of his family was dead. 7 in total. No plague, no fire, just a string of sudden deaths, illness, accidents, unexplained heart failure. The estate was sold off, debts paid, the statue passed on. Its next home was the manor of Ivor Minucci. He was wealthy, well-liked, and surrounded by family. 4 years later, that family was gone. All of them. The pattern was becoming harder to ignore. Still, the statue moved forward, from one home to another, trailing sorrow like dust in a beam of light. Lord Thompson Noel brought her into his collection. The curse quickened. His family fell to tragedy in a short span, each death more senseless than the last. By the time it reached Sir Alan Burbrook, the idol's reputation had grown, but Burbrook was not a superstitious man. He placed the statue in the entry hall of his estate. Within months, his wife died from a sudden aneurysm. His daughters followed, stricken by a strange illness. Then Burbrook himself collapsed. Only his 2 sons survived. They stood in a house filled with silence, surrounded by portraits that no longer meant anything. And in the center of it all, the cold, unblinking gaze of the limestone woman. They didn't sell her. That would be cruel. But they didn't want her either. So they gave her away to a museum. The Royal Scottish Museum in Edinburgh accepted the donation. Surely, in the sterile safety of public display, the curse would lose its grip. But not long after the statue was handled by a senior curator, he died at his desk. A sudden, massive heart attack. Quiet, immediate, no explanation. After that, the idol was sealed in a reinforced glass case. Museum staff were forbidden from touching it. It was labeled Artifact 103-2. She remains there today. Tourists take photos. Children press their noses to the glass. She does not move, but there is something about her presence. A stillness too heavy, a silence too deep. Why do we keep such things? Why are we drawn to the relics of suffering, to objects wrapped in stories of death and misfortune? Is it a form of remembrance, a warning? Or do we believe deep down that proximity to tragedy grants us some control over it, that by facing fear head-on, we master it? The woman from Lem was once just stone. Then she became legend. And now she is history, enclosed, protected, but never forgotten. Perhaps it is not the statue that brings death. Perhaps it simply watches it unfold, as it always has, from the beginning of time, unmoved. And perhaps that's what truly unsettles us, her silence in the face of all our sorrow. In the year 2000, as the internet was still stretching into homes and hearts, a strange auction appeared on eBay. It wasn't for an antique or a collectible, it was for a painting. The title, "The Hands Resist Him." The image was unsettling. A young boy stood expressionless next to a doll, not a charming toy, but a life-sized figure with hollow sockets instead of eyes. Behind them loomed a glass door, and behind that door, disembodied hands pressed against the glass, clawing to get through. The seller, a couple from California, included a warning. They claimed the painting was found behind an abandoned brewery. They hung it in their daughter's room. Soon, she began screaming at night, insisting that the figures moved, that they fought. She said the boy came into her room. To prove it was all in her imagination, the father set up a motion sensor camera. What the photos showed disturbed even him. They seemed to depict the painted boy stepping out of the canvas. The doll raised an object that looked like a gun or a strange tool. The couple listed the painting for sale immediately. Within days, the listing went viral. People who saw the image online reported nausea, blackouts, and anxiety. Some claimed their monitors malfunctioned. Others heard whispers or screams when the image appeared on screen. Emails flooded the sellers. Fear spread like wildfire. Eventually, the painting was purchased by Kim Smith, a gallery owner in Michigan. He was unafraid, curious. He tracked down the artist, Bill Stoneham. Stoneham explained that the boy in the painting was himself at 5. The door symbolized the barrier between reality and dreams. The hands were other possibilities, other lives. The doll, a guide. It was meant to be symbolic. But then Stoneham mentioned something else. The first critic to review the painting had died within a year. So had the first gallery owner to exhibit it. And John Marley, the actor who originally purchased the painting, he died shortly after from complications during surgery. Smith chose not to hang the painting in his home. He keeps it in storage, safe, unseen. Still, about once a month, someone reaches out, offering to perform an exorcism on the artwork. Stoneham, for his part, later painted a sequel. In it, the boy is older. The doll still stands beside him. But it's the original that lingers in public memory, the strange, arresting image that reached through a screen and touched people in places they didn't expect. What made this painting different? It wasn't ancient. It wasn't hidden in a temple or buried in the earth. It was modern, digital, viral. And that may be what made it so potent. It became the first cursed object of the internet age, one that haunted not just the home, but the mind. When does art cross a line? When does a work of imagination become something more? A vessel, perhaps, for the fears we didn't know we were carrying. Maybe the painting is just pigment and canvas, but maybe it reminds us that what we fear most isn't death or evil. It's the idea that reality can be fluid, that what we believe to be still may be watching, and that behind every window 1,000 hands might be reaching out, waiting to pull us in. The boy stares blankly. The doll does not blink. And somewhere behind the glass, the hands still resist. There is a chair in North Yorkshire, England, a plain oak, high-backed seat that has outlived generations and allegedly ended many of them. Its story begins in 1702 with a man named Thomas Busby. A petty criminal, counterfeiter, and known drunk, Busby wasn't known for sentiment, but he had one prized possession, his chair. No one else was to sit in it, ever. One day, Busby came home to find his father-in-law, Daniel Oughty, sitting in it. The details of their argument are lost, but the outcome is not. That night, Busby murdered Oughty in cold blood. He was quickly arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. Before he was taken to the gallows, Busby requested a final drink in his favorite pub. He sat in his beloved chair one last time. As he stood, he turned to the gathered patrons and cursed it. May sudden death come to anyone who dares sit in my chair. And then he was hanged. The chair remained in the pub, which over time was renamed the Busby Stoop Inn. Locals viewed it with a mix of amusement and unease. It became a dare, a test of bravery. For decades, people sat in it, laughed, toasted to ghosts. But during World War II, the pattern shifted from story to statistic. Airmen from a nearby Royal Canadian Air Force base frequented the pub. The landlord began to notice something. Those who sat in Busby's chair often never returned from missions. They were shot down, vanished, killed in accidents. The chair became empty more often than not, avoided even on crowded nights. Skeptics mocked the legend. Some sat in it deliberately. In 1967, two RAF pilots, both healthy and young, sat in the chair, clinking glasses, sneering at superstition. Hours later, their car veered off the road and crashed into a tree. Both men died instantly. Years later, a builder paused during lunch to rest. He sat in the chair, ate his sandwich, laughed with co-workers. That afternoon, he fell from a roof. The platform beneath him had collapsed without warning. A cleaning lady tripped and landed in the chair. She died shortly after from a brain tumor. A delivery driver used it for a quick rest. He died the next day of a sudden heart attack. Death, it seemed, followed not long behind those who used the chair. Eventually, the pub's owner could no longer stomach it. He called the Thirsk Museum and offered them the chair, on one condition: no one must ever sit in it again. They agreed. The chair now hangs 5 feet above the museum floor, suspended by strong cables. A warning placard rests beside it. Staff clean it carefully, never leaning on it, never risking contact. Visitors gaze up at it, snapping photos, whispering to one another. Some laugh, others step back, instinctively wary. It's just a chair after all. But something about the weight of a curse lingers in the wood grain, in the curve of the armrests, worn down by hands long gone. What was once a mundane object of comfort became a vessel for rage, and perhaps something else. We often forget that the objects we use every day absorb more than wear. They carry our emotions, our obsessions, our final acts. And when one man, moments from death, cursed a chair, maybe he gave more of himself to it than anyone realized. Would you sit in it, or would you keep your distance, wondering what unseen figure might be watching, waiting for someone else to make that mistake? Sometimes, it's not what we build that matters. It's what we leave behind inside it. It absorbs light rather than reflects it. A black diamond so dark it seems to swallow the room. We know it today as the Black Orlov, but once it had another name, the Eye of Brahma. According to legend, the 67-carat gem once rested in a sacred statue in a temple in Pondicherry, India, one of the divine eyes of the Hindu god of creation. No one knows exactly how it left that temple. Some say a monk-turned-thief pried it loose under cover of night. Others say it was taken during colonial upheaval. What followed, however, is far clearer. The priests cursed the stone. It first surfaced in the West in 1932, in the possession of a New York diamond dealer named J.W. Paris. He was a successful man, respected, affluent, seemingly untouchable. Within months of acquiring the gem, he grew paranoid and withdrawn. Then, one April morning, he climbed to the top of a Manhattan skyscraper and jumped. The diamond moved on. Next, it belonged to Russian royalty, 2 princesses, Leonila Galitzini-Beryatinsky and Nadia Orlov, whose name became entwined with the gem's legend. In 1947, within weeks of each other, both women leapt to their deaths from buildings in Rome. They did not know one another, yet they met the same end in the same city, bearing the same jewel. 3 suicides, same stone, same story. But rather than destroy it, a daring gem cutter named Charles F. Winson had another idea: transformation. If the curse lived in the identity of the diamond, he reasoned, then reshaping it might break the spell. With steady hands, he cut the gem into 3 separate stones, a symbolic severing of the curse. It took 2 years. Since then, There have been no confirmed deaths tied to the fragments. They now rest in private collections, their locations carefully guarded. But even in its divided form, the Black Orlov commands unease. Some gemologists refuse to handle it. Others say the darkness inside it has only become more concentrated. There's something deeply human in our need to reshape what haunts us. We cut it down, break it apart, give it new names. But does that change what it is? Is the curse in the diamond or in the desire that surrounds it? The Black Orlov was once a sacred object, desecrated, stolen, sold, passed hand to hand as if its past could be ignored. Each owner thought they were above its history, and each paid the price. Maybe the deaths were coincidence. Maybe they were the result of pressure, of psychological weight. Or maybe, just maybe, the stone remembers. In darkness, it waits, unblinking. And when the light catches it just right, it doesn't shimmer. It swallows. Because some things are not meant to reflect beauty. Some things are meant to remind us of what we took and what we can never fully erase. He stares straight ahead, eyes brimming with tears. A single glimmer trails down his cheek. The painting is simple, almost overly sentimental, a child's sorrow captured in brushstrokes. In the 1950s, Italian artist Giovanni Bragolin painted a series of portraits of weeping orphans. They were mass-produced, sold cheaply, and hung in thousands of working-class homes across Britain. Sentimental, melancholy, but harmless, or so everyone thought. In 1985, a firefighter from Yorkshire spoke to a journalist from The Sun. His claim was strange. He had responded to dozens of house fires, each one devastating, each one nearly total. Yet in every single case, he said, a print of the crying boy was found, unburned, lying face up in the ashes, untouched by flame. The newspaper ran the headline, "Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy." And just like that, a national panic ignited. Letters poured in. One woman said she bought the painting, and the next day, her kitchen caught fire. Another said their house had burned to the ground within months of hanging it, and the picture survived, pristine. One man rebuilt his restaurant after it burned. He rehung the painting. It burned again. The stories shared a theme. Fire would take everything, but never the boy. Theories swirled. Some said the paintings were cursed, a portal for something destructive. Others claimed the model, a real boy, had been cursed himself. They said his name was Don Bonillo, an orphan whose parents died in a fire. Locals called him Diablo, the devil, because flames followed him wherever he went. There were whispers that Bragolin had unknowingly captured the boy's power in the painting, sealing his grief and his rage into the canvas. The hysteria reached such a peak that the Sun organized mass bonfires. People mailed in their copies. On Halloween, thousands of prints were burned under the supervision of the fire brigade. Skeptics offered a calmer explanation. The prints were made with a varnish that was fire-resistant. The high-density hardboard backing simply didn't ignite as easily as fabric or wood. But that didn't explain the fires themselves, only the painting's survival. And perhaps that's what unnerved people most. We accept that objects can burn, that homes can fall. But when one object refuses to, again and again, we begin to look for meaning. We assign agency, malice, memory. The crying boy became more than a painting. It became a symbol of trauma, of superstition, of the thin veil between art and reality. It reminds us that what we bring into our homes carries weight, that sentiment can sometimes mask something else entirely. Today, the legend has faded, but the painting still surfaces now and then, in thrift shops, attics, forgotten walls. People still hesitate before hanging it. Some refuse to bring it inside at all. He still stares out from the canvas, still crying, and perhaps still waiting. Because some images don't just capture emotion, they echo it. And in the quiet hum of a dark room, that single painted tear might just glisten, a little too real. It looked like an ordinary wine cabinet, old, wooden, with brass handles and an air of forgotten history. But what it held inside would become one of the most infamous legends of the 21st century. In 2001, Kevin Mannis, an antiques dealer in Oregon, attended an estate sale. The seller was the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. She offered him the cabinet, but with a warning. Her grandmother had always said it must remain shut. Inside, she believed, lived a Dybbuk, a malicious spirit from Jewish folklore. Mannis, curious and unconvinced, bought the box and brought it to his shop. He placed it in the basement. Almost immediately, strange things began to happen. Lights shattered, security gates locked on their own. The store filled with the pungent smell of cat urine, though there were no animals inside. Then came the voices, faint whispers, shadows, just at the edge of vision. His employees were terrified. Mannis opened the box. Inside, he found odd items, 2 locks of hair, one dark, one blonde, pennies from the 1920s, a dried flower, a small golden goblet, and a granite slab etched with the Hebrew word shalom. A strange collection, personal, ritualistic, something meant to trap or bind. He decided to give the box to his mother as a birthday gift. 5 minutes after receiving it, she suffered a massive stroke. As paramedics wheeled her away, she lost the ability to speak, but she managed to spell something out with her eyes, slowly and deliberately. HategIft. The box changed hands again. Each new owner reported the same symptoms: nightmares, illness, shadowy figures, the scent of jasmine mixed with rot. Electronics failed around it. Hair fell out in clumps. One man said he was tormented by an old woman who beat him in his sleep. Another began coughing up blood. Eventually, the Dybbuk Box was acquired by Jason Haxton, a museum director. He became gravely ill: hives, bleeding, temporary blindness. Fearing for his life, Haxton consulted rabbis. A ritual was performed to seal the spirit. The box was placed inside a gold-lined container, gold believed to block spiritual energy, and buried in a secret location. But it didn't stay buried. The box was later bought by paranormal investigator Zach Bagans, who added it to his haunted museum in Las Vegas. There it sits in a glass case, sealed but visible. Visitors report faint voices, sudden nausea, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Even celebrities have not been spared. Post Malone, the rapper, visited the museum. He stood near the box while it was opened. Shortly after, his private jet nearly crashed. His home was broken into, and he survived a serious car accident, all in the span of weeks. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the box carries more than superstition. In many traditions, boxes are used to hold not just objects, but intentions, prayers, secrets, warnings. When we open them, we risk releasing not just what was placed inside, but everything that has gathered since. The Dybbuk Box is, in some ways, a mirror. It reflects back our fear of containment, The things we lock away, the memories we bury, the grief we refuse to name. And sometimes, when the lid creaks open, we find that what was inside has been waiting, patiently. Because this is what is a curse, if not something too heavy to carry alone. And what is a box, if not a promise that one day someone else will try to open it again? Long before fantasy novels and film adaptations, there was another ring, real, heavy, and inscribed with mystery. It was found in 1785, buried in the soil of Hampshire, England. A large Roman gold ring, far too big for a finger. Its Latin inscription read, "Live well isod." At first, it was just a curiosity, but decades later, in a ruined Roman temple more than 100 miles away, archaeologists discovered something else, a lead curse tablet. And that's where the story changed. The tablet told of a man named Silvianus who had lost a gold ring. He believed it had been stolen by someone named Sinicianus. Furious and betrayed, Silvianus dedicated the ring to the god Nodens and invoked divine punishment. The curse was detailed. Until the ring was returned, Sinicianus and anyone bearing his name would be denied health. Centuries apart, the ring and the curse had been reunited. In 1929, the archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler sought help in interpreting the inscription and its deeper meaning. He reached out to a rising academic at Oxford, a young professor of Anglo-Saxon named J.R. Tolkien. Tolkien spent months researching the ring, the temple, and the old Roman curse. He visited the site known locally as Dwarf's Hill, a place riddled with ancient mine shafts and whispered legends. 2 years later, he began writing The Hobbit. Scholars have long speculated that this Roman ring, heavy with mystery, entwined with vengeance, helped shape Tolkien's vision of the One Ring, a band of gold that carried not wealth but weight, a thing of power, loss, and corruption. The real ring now resides at the Vine, a National Trust property in England. It sits in a rotating display case, protected but not hidden. Tourists gaze at it, some unaware of its story. Others speak of strange sensations, a sudden heaviness, a chill, the feeling of unseen eyes. There is no proof of a curse, no trail of deaths or misfortune. But the feeling persists, as if the ring still waits for the thief to return it, still echoes with the bitterness of Silvianus. It is easy to forget that objects can outlive emotion. That vengeance, once cast into the world, can continue long after names fade. This ring was not born in fire nor carried across mountains, but it is real, and perhaps more unsettling for that reason, because it shows that long before fiction, we were already shaping myths out of metal, already whispering to the gods for justice, already leaving behind pieces of ourselves sealed in gold. And if an author could be inspired by a curse nearly 2 millennia old, what else might be hiding in museum glass cases, waiting for someone to listen again? Perhaps it's not about power. Perhaps it's about memory and the things we can't bear to forget or forgive. The sun was high over the Ötztal Alps in September 1991 when 2 German hikers took a shortcut through the ice. What they thought was debris turned out to be a corpse, frozen, leathery, and half-buried in the glacier. They had discovered something remarkable, the oldest intact human body ever found. He would come to be known as Ötzi. Carbon dating revealed he had died over 500 years ago, a Copper Age hunter preserved by ice and time, along with his tools, weapons, and clothing. It was a scientific miracle, a window into the Neolithic world. But almost immediately, a darker narrative began to unfold. The forensic pathologist who first handled Ötzi with his bare hands, Dr. Rainer Henn, died in a head-on collision en route to a conference about the Iceman. He was just 64. Then Kurt Fritz, the mountain guide who led the excavation team and uncovered Ötzi's face, was killed in an avalanche. Strangely, he was the only member of his group to die, despite being the most experienced. Next came the filmmaker Rainer Holzel, who documented the removal of the body. He died of a sudden brain tumor. Helmut Simon, the hiker who first spotted Ötzi, returned to the Alps in 2004. He disappeared in a freak storm. His body was found 2 weeks later. He had fallen over 300 feet. The head of the rescue team that searched for Simon, Dieter Warnecke, died of a heart attack the very day after Simon's funeral. He was 45. Dr. Konrad Spindler, the lead archaeologist on the project, scoffed at the rumors. "Curse," he said. "I think it's a load of rubbish." He died shortly after, from complications of a chronic illness. And finally, Tom Loy, an American scientist who had analyzed Ötzi's tools, died of a rare blood disease, just before finishing his book on the mummy. 7 deaths, all men directly linked to Ötzi's discovery or study, all within a short span. Scientists are quick to dismiss the idea of a curse. They point to coincidence, stress, exposure to harsh elements, logical explanations. But for many, the pattern is hard to ignore. Ötzi now lies in the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, kept in a temperature-controlled chamber mimicking his icy tomb. Visitors view him through a thick glass window. Scientists wear protective suits before entering. Ostensibly, it's to preserve the mummy from modern bacteria, but maybe, just maybe, it's also to protect us from him. Throughout history, the disturbance of ancient graves has carried with it a deep taboo. From the supposed curse of Tutankhamun's tomb to Ötzi's slow roll of tragedy, we are reminded that death is not always dormant. We tell ourselves that these stories are myth, that science is immune to superstition, and yet we hesitate, we shiver, we look over our shoulders. Maybe it's not the body that's cursed, maybe it's the act of uncovering what was meant to remain hidden. A breach of silence, a broken trust, and maybe some part of him still lingers in the frozen dark, watching the bright lights, the gloved hands, the faces peering in through the glass. 5,000 years ago, he died alone. Now, he is never alone. And perhaps that's what disturbs us most, that even in death, he has no peace. And neither, it seems, do we. From the outside, it looks like a child's toy, a painting of bright color and curious expression. But behind the glass, the eyes are hollow. And behind the hollow eyes, the hands press against the barrier, dozens of them, silent and reaching. We've seen haunted paintings before, but the hands resist him was something else. It was not just an artwork. It was a phenomenon, a psychological trigger, a digital ghost story that refused to stay within the frame. The painting had been stored in a gallery warehouse for years. When it surfaced online in a 2000 eBay listing, it arrived with a warning. This piece, the sellers claimed, was haunted. Found behind an old brewery in California, they had hung it in their home. Their 4-year-old daughter began screaming nightly. She said the boy came into her room, that he fought with the doll. The father, skeptical, set up a motion-triggered camera. What the camera caught, he posted online. Images that seemed to show the painted figures moving. The boy stepping out of the frame. The doll lifting a strange device toward him. People weren't sure what they were seeing, but the reaction was visceral. Thousands viewed the listing, and many reported immediate strange responses: dizziness, nausea, feelings of dread. Some claimed their electronics malfunctioned when the image was on screen. Others heard static, even faint screaming. Was it hysteria, a mass delusion triggered by suggestion, or something else? The painting was eventually bought by Kim Smith, a Michigan gallery owner. He contacted the original artist, Bill Stoneham, to learn more. Stoneham was surprised by the attention. He said the boy in the painting was himself at 5. The door behind him represented the barrier between the waking world and dream. The doll was his guide. The hands were possibilities, lives not lived. But then he mentioned something unexpected. The first gallery owner to display the painting died within a year. So did the critic who reviewed it. And John Marley, the actor who originally bought the piece, died shortly after acquiring it. Coincidences, maybe, but the pattern added weight to the painting's growing reputation. Smith keeps it in storage now, safe, undisturbed. Once a month, he still receives emails offering to exorcise it or destroy it. Stoneham, unfazed, eventually painted sequels, showing the boy growing older. But none carry the same unsettling energy. None haunt people quite like the original. Perhaps because the curse, if there is one, is not in the paint. It's in the context, the timing, the way the internet, that infinite gallery of stray emotions, turned a forgotten artwork into a mirror of collective anxiety. Why does it unsettle us? Maybe because it touches on something we don't like to admit, that art is alive in ways we can't always explain. That images don't just reflect, they imprint. They nest in our minds. They wait. In the end, the hands resist him may simply be a painting, but the fear it inspires is real, because we know deep down that boundaries can be broken, that the frame isn't always enough to contain what we see. And once you've imagined the boy stepping out, it's hard to unsee him, especially in the dark. It was never meant to be famous. In the early 20th century, a gold ring surfaced during a quiet day of ploughing in an English field. It bore an inscription, "Senicianus, may you live in God," and a heavy sense of something left unresolved. The ring was large, too big for any ordinary hand. Roman in origin, curious in its craftsmanship. Decades later, 100 miles away, a lead curse tablet was discovered at a temple dedicated to the ancient god Nodens. It read more like a plea than a prayer. A Roman named Silvianus had lost a ring. He believed Senicianus had stolen it, and so he called upon the gods for retribution. "To none grant health," he wrote, "until he brings back the ring." For centuries, the ring and the curse were separated, but eventually the connection was made by Sir Mortimer Wheeler, an archaeologist, and the man he turned to for help, a little-known Oxford professor named J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien was captivated by the story: a cursed ring, a temple in ruins, a plea to the divine for justice. He visited the temple site, known to locals as Dwarf's Hill. He studied the language, the mythology, the desperation encoded in the ancient lead tablet. Within 2 years, he began writing The Hobbit. The parallels are striking. A powerful ring, a theft, a relentless desire to reclaim what was lost. And in the center of it all, the haunting question: what price does power extract from its bearer? The real ring, now known as the Ring of Silvianus, rests in the Vine, a stately home managed by the National Trust. It sits in a rotating glass case, guarded not by magic, but by history. Visitors speak of a strange feeling near it, a drop in temperature, a weight in the chest. Some claim it's just suggestion. Others aren't so sure. There's no trail of death surrounding it, no string of misfortunes like other cursed relics. But there is something about the ring that lingers, a tension, as if the wrong has not yet been righted. Tolkien transformed the ring into myth, but what inspired him was rooted in reality, in the very human urge to see meaning in loss, to demand justice from forces unseen. We forget that curses weren't always melodramatic threats. They were formal declarations, ritual acts, the only justice the powerless could afford, carved into stone, etched into metal, buried in the earth, and entrusted to gods. The Ring of Silvianus is not evil, but it is unresolved, a symbol of grievance left unanswered for nearly 2,000 years. And perhaps that's why it endures, because so many of us carry the same question. When something is taken from us, something sacred, something deeply ours, what do we become in trying to get it back? Sometimes we write stories. Sometimes we write curses. And sometimes we pass the weight along, into the hands of the next one who dares to wear it. So many of these stories end the same way, with silence. Objects once revered, now locked in cases. Paintings rolled away in storage, statues behind glass, rings under soft light. We say we've contained them. We say we are safe. But the truth is, we don't bury curses. We carry them. The Basano Vase lies in an undisclosed grave, sealed in lead, hidden from metal detectors. But is it gone, or merely waiting? The Porsche 550 Spider vanished from a sealed train car. Did it disappear, or did someone set it free? The woman from Lem still stands, encased in thick glass. No one dares touch her, and yet she remains in view, her hollow eyes meeting thousands of stares every year. We've studied these artifacts, catalogued them, named them, placed placards beside them in careful typeface. But knowledge does not always bring control. Sometimes it just deepens the unease. The objects themselves are not evil. They are wood and wire, stone and silver. What gives them power, if anything does, is us. Our memory, our belief, our fear. A curse is not necessarily a spell. It might be a story too heavy to end, a wound that refuses to close, a grief that echoes so loudly through time it starts to shape the things it touches. And perhaps that's what these haunted items really are, echoes, not of spirits, but of emotion, tragedy baked into matter. And yet, we are drawn to them, because these objects ask something of us. Do you believe? Not in ghosts or demons, but in meaning, in the idea that things retain memory, that what we touch might touch us back, that maybe, just maybe, history has a heartbeat. In a dusty shop corner, you might see a framed print, a child crying, untouched by time. Would you hang it in your home? Or on a collector's shelf, a carved statue of a forgotten goddess sits quietly. Would you reach out to brush the dust away? Or you might hear about a sealed wooden box, stained with time, filled with old trinkets and sealed words. Would you open it? Each object is a question. Not just what if it's cursed, but what if it isn't, and we still feel afraid? Because that fear tells us something essential, that we are connected to the past, and it to us. That memory doesn't only live in minds, it lives in things, in matter, in story, and so we keep these relics, not to celebrate suffering, but to remember, to reflect, to respect the limits of what we understand. Curiosity may have killed the cat, but it also built museums, it wrote books, it whispered across generations. We don't fear cursed objects because they're dangerous. We fear them because they remind us that some things, loss, sorrow, vengeance, awe, never truly fade. They just change shape, and sometimes they wait for someone to come close enough to listen again. End.